Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small town of Millbrook. At 19, she carried herself with quiet confidence, but beneath her calm exterior lay a secret that only her closest friend Sid knew about. Sarah had been born with a distinctive birthmark on her left shoulder, a patch of skin that was completely white, standing out against her olive complexion like a small cloud against a stormy sky. The marking had made her self-conscious throughout her childhood. Kids at school would stare and whisper, and Sarah learned early to keep it hidden under long sleeves and carefully chosen clothing. Her mother had always told her it made her special, but Sarah just wanted to blend in with everyone else. Everything changed when she started working at Henderson Security Solutions 6 months ago. The company provided security services for local businesses and events, and Sarah had been hired as a trainee after impressing the owner, Mr. Henderson, during her interview. She was determined to prove herself in what was traditionally a male-dominated field. Her colleague Jake Morrison had been assigned as her training partner. Jake was 25, tall, and muscular, with the kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance. He had been working at the company for 3 years and made sure everyone knew he was one of their best employees. From the beginning, Jake seemed to resent having to train a young woman, especially one who asked thoughtful questions and sometimes challenged his methods. Sid Williams, Sarah's best friend since middle school, also worked at Henderson Security. Unlike Jake, Sid was quiet and observant, preferring to watch and listen rather than dominate conversations. At 21, he had a lean build and kind eyes that missed nothing. Sid had gotten the job first and recommended Sarah when a position opened up. He knew about her birthmark and had always been protective of her, especially when others made her feel different or uncomfortable. The tension between Jake and Sarah had been building for weeks. During training exercises, Jake would make subtle comments about whether women really belonged in security work. He would assign Sarah the most mundane tasks during their shifts, claiming she needed to work her way up to more important responsibilities. Sarah endured it professionally, determined not to give him any reason to question her capabilities. The incident that would change everything began on a Tuesday morning in early October. Mr. Henderson had announced that all employees would participate in mandatory emergency response drills throughout the week. These drills were designed to test their reactions to various security scenarios, from medical emergencies to potential threats at the sites they protected. Sarah arrived early that morning, as she always did. She wore her standard uniform, black pants, a white collared shirt, and the company jacket that she kept buttoned up to conceal her birthmark. The morning air was crisp, and fallen leaves crunched under her feet as she walked from the parking lot to the main building. Sid was already in the break room, nursing a cup of coffee and reviewing the day's schedule on his tablet. He looked up and smiled when Sarah entered. "Ready for another day of Jake's wisdom?" Sid asked with a slight grin, keeping his voice low. Sarah rolled her eyes playfully. "I'm just focused on doing good work. He can think whatever he wants about me. You know I've got your back, right?" Sid's expression became more serious. "If he ever crosses a line, I can handle myself," Sarah replied, though she appreciated Sid's concern. "Besides, it's just training. Once I'm certified, I'll be working my own shifts." Jake entered the break room a few minutes later, his heavy footsteps announcing his arrival before he appeared in the doorway. He barely acknowledged Sid and gave Sarah only a curt nod. "We've got the drill today," Jake announced, as if they weren't already aware. "Henderson wants to see how the newbie handles pressure." Sarah bristled at being called newbie, but kept her expression neutral. "I'm ready for whatever the drill involves." Jake's eyes glinted with something that made Sid shift uncomfortably in his chair. "We'll see about that. Sometimes people think they're ready for something until they're actually tested." The morning passed slowly as they prepared for the drill. Mr. Henderson had been deliberately vague about what type of scenario they would face, explaining that realistic emergency situations didn't come with advance warning. Sarah spent the time reviewing her training materials and mentally preparing herself for various possibilities. Around noon, all employees were called to the main training area behind the building. The space was set up like a mock office environment, complete with desks, filing cabinets, and a reception area. Mr. Henderson stood at the front with a clipboard, his expression serious. Today's drill simulates a situation where an unknown individual has entered one of our clients' office buildings, he announced. Your job is to assess the threat level and respond appropriately. Remember, safety is always the top priority for yourselves and for any civilians in the area. Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly, but it was the good kind of nervous energy that came with an interesting challenge. She had studied emergency response protocols extensively and felt confident in her theoretical knowledge. Now she would have a chance to put it into practice. Mr. Henderson continued explaining the scenario, but Sarah noticed Jake watching her intently. There was something in his expression that made her uncomfortable, though she couldn't quite identify what it was. Sid had noticed it too and moved slightly closer to where Sarah was standing. Teams will be randomly assigned, Mr. Henderson announced, pulling names from a hat. First team, Morrison and Martinez. Sarah's stomach sank slightly. She had hoped to be paired with someone other than Jake for the drill, but she kept her expression professional. Jake, on the other hand, smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Looks like it's you and me, partner, he said, the word partner carrying an undertone that made Sarah's skin crawl. Sid caught Sarah's eye and mouthed, "Be careful." She nodded almost imperceptibly, grateful for his support even as she prepared to prove herself capable of handling whatever Jake might throw at her. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal true character and test loyalties in ways none of them expected. As the drill began, the quiet tension that had been building for weeks was about to explode into something much more serious. The drill began with Mr. Henderson explaining that they would be responding to reports of a suspicious person in the mock office building. Sarah and Jake were designated as the first response team, while other employees played various roles including civilians, building security, and backup personnel. Sarah checked her equipment one final time: radio, flashlight, notepad, and the basic first aid kit that all trainees carried. She had practiced these procedures dozens of times in training, but this felt different. The weight of Jake's expectations, combined with her determination to prove herself, created an electric tension in the air. "Remember," Jake said as they approached the entrance to the mock building, "I'm the senior officer here. You follow my lead, and don't do anything unless I tell you to." Sarah nodded, though she knew that wasn't exactly how partner protocols were supposed to work. According to their training manual, both officers should communicate and make decisions together, with the senior officer taking point only in situations requiring immediate action. They entered the building through the main entrance. The space had been designed to look like a typical office environment, complete with cubicles, a reception desk, and several private offices along the perimeter. Other employees had been positioned throughout the space to act as civilians, and Sarah could hear muffled conversations and the sound of typing coming from various areas. The scenario briefing had mentioned reports of someone acting strangely on the third floor, but they were supposed to clear each level systematically. Sarah and Jake started with the ground floor, checking in with the actress playing the receptionist. "Excuse me," Jake addressed the woman behind the desk, his voice taking on the professional tone he used during actual work situations. "We're responding to reports of unusual activity in a building. Have you noticed anything out of the ordinary today?" The receptionist, played by Maria from accounting, shook her head convincingly. "Everything's been normal down here, but I did hear some commotion upstairs about 20 minutes ago." Sarah made notes on her pad, while Jake continued the questioning. She noticed that he was conducting the interview exactly by the book, which surprised her. Despite their personality conflicts, Jake was genuinely skilled at his job. They moved to the stairwell to access the upper floors. As they climbed, Sarah could feel sweat beginning to form on her back, partly from nerves and partly because she always ran warm when she was focused. The company jacket she wore was heavier than she would have liked, but it served its important purpose of keeping her birthmark hidden. "You're breathing pretty hard," Jake commented as they reached the second-floor landing. "Maybe security work is more physically demanding than you expected." Sarah was actually breathing normally, but she didn't want to create conflict during the drill. "I'm Fina. Should we check this floor first or continue to where the report came from?" "We'll do this my way," Jake replied, pushing open the door to the second floor. Never assume the report location is accurate. Good security means being thorough. The second floor was set up as a series of conference rooms and smaller offices. They moved through systematically, Jake taking the lead and Sarah covering the areas he indicated. Everything seemed normal until they reached the last conference room at the end of the hall. Inside, Tom from the IT department was sitting at the table with papers scattered around him, playing the role of an agitated individual. When Jake and Sarah entered, Tom began acting erratically, standing up quickly and speaking in a loud, confused voice. "Who are you? Why are you here?" "I'm trying to work," Tom shouted, staying in character, but making it clear he was supposed to represent someone who might be experiencing a mental health crisis. This was exactly the type of scenario Sarah had studied extensively. The key was to remain calm, avoid escalating the situation, and focus on de-escalation while assessing whether the person posed any real threat. Jake, however, immediately took an aggressive stance. "Sir, we need you to calm down and identify yourself. We're security officers investigating reports of unusual behavior." Sarah watched as Tom continued his performance, becoming more agitated in response to Jake's demanding tone. According to their training, this was exactly the wrong approach for someone who might be experiencing psychological distress. "Jake," Sarah said quietly, "maybe we should try a softer approach. He seems scared rather than dangerous." Jake turned to her with irritation flashing in his eyes. "I told you to follow my lead. Stay back, and let me handle this." But Sarah could see that Jake's aggressive approach was making the situation worse. Tom was backing toward the window, his performance becoming more frantic. In a real situation, this could easily escalate to someone getting hurt. "Sir," Sarah said, stepping slightly forward and using the calmest voice she could manage. "My name is Sarah, and we're here to help. Can you tell me your name?" The change in Tom's demeanor was immediate. He responded to Sarah's gentle tone, his agitation decreasing as she continued to speak calmly and ask non-threatening questions. Within a few minutes, she had successfully de-escalated the situation and gathered the information they needed. Jake's face had grown increasingly red during this exchange. As soon as Tom indicated that his part of the drill was complete, Jake grabbed Sarah's arm roughly. "What part of follow my lead did you not understand?" he hissed, his voice low enough that Tom couldn't hear, but intense with anger. "I was trying to help," Sarah replied, pulling her arm free. The situation was escalating, and I knew a different approach might work better. "You made me look incompetent in front of everyone," Jake snapped. "You think because you read some textbooks, you know better than someone who's actually been doing this job?" Before Sarah could respond, Jake reached out and grabbed the front of her jacket. What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. In his anger and desire to intimidate her, Jake yanked hard on her jacket, causing several buttons to pop off and the garment to pull open. Sarah's white company shirt was suddenly visible, but more importantly, the distinctive white patch on her left shoulder was now clearly exposed where her shirt had shifted. The birthmark that she had kept hidden for months was suddenly on full display. For a moment, both Sarah and Jake stood frozen. Sarah's hands immediately moved to pull her jacket closed, her cheeks burning with humiliation and anger. Jake's expression shifted from anger to surprise, then to something that looked almost like satisfaction. Well, Jake said, his voice taking on a cruel tone. "Looks like the perfect little trainee has been hiding something. What else aren't you telling us about yourself?" Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she tried to button her jacket back up, but several of the buttons were now scattered on the floor. She felt exposed and vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with the drill scenario they were supposed to be performing. "That's none of your business," she managed to say, though her voice wasn't as steady as she would have liked. Jake stepped closer, and Sarah could smell the coffee on his breath. "In security work, we need to know we can trust our partners completely. How do we know you're not hiding other things? Medical conditions that might affect your performance? Personal issues that could compromise your judgment? The birthmark doesn't affect my work in any way, Sarah said, anger beginning to override her embarrassment. And you had no right to grab me like that. I barely touched you. Jake replied with a dismissive wave. If you can't handle a little physical contact, maybe this job really isn't for you. What happens when you're in a real emergency and someone grabs you? Are you going to fall apart then, too? Sarah felt tears threatening to form behind her eyes, but she refused to let Jake see her cry. She had worked too hard to get to this point, and she wasn't going to let his bullying behavior destroy her confidence or her career. What neither of them realized was that their entire exchange had been overheard. Sid had been positioned in the hallway as part of his role in the drill, and he had witnessed Jake's aggressive behavior through the conference room's glass wall. More importantly, Mr. Henderson had been observing the drill from a concealed position and had seen exactly what had happened. The drill was about to take a very different turn than anyone had expected. Sid had seen enough. Through the glass wall of the conference room, he had watched Jake grab Sarah's jacket and witnessed the moment her carefully guarded secret was exposed. The look of humiliation and anger on Sarah's face made his blood boil, but it was Jake's cruel satisfaction that pushed Sid past his breaking point. Without considering the consequences for interrupting the drill, Sid pushed open the conference room door. His usually calm demeanor was replaced by barely controlled fury, though his voice remained steady when he spoke. "Is there a problem here?" Sid asked, his eyes fixed on Jake while simultaneously checking to make sure Sarah was okay. Jake turned around, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Everything's fine, Williams. We're in the middle of completing our scenario." "Really?" Sid's voice carried a dangerous quiet that Sarah had never heard before. "Because from where I was standing, it looked like you assaulted your partner." "Assaulted?" Jake laughed, but there was nervousness creeping into his voice. "Don't be dramatic. We were just having a discussion about proper protocol." Sid stepped closer to Jake, and despite being smaller in build, there was something in his presence that made Jake unconsciously take a step backward. A discussion that involved grabbing her jacket and exposing her without consent. Sarah watched the confrontation with a mixture of gratitude and worry. She appreciated Sid's protection, but she didn't want him to get in trouble for defending her, especially during an official company drill. "Sid, it's okay," she said softly, though her voice still carried the tremor of anger and humiliation. "No, Sarah, it's not okay," Sid replied, never taking his eyes off Jake. "What he did was wrong, and everyone needs to understand that." Jake's face was growing redder by the minute. "You don't know what you're talking about, Williams. Martinez interfered with my handling of the scenario, and I was simply trying to get her attention. By grabbing her clothing," Sid's voice rose slightly. "By humiliating her? By exposing something she clearly wanted to keep private? If she's got something to hide, maybe she doesn't belong in this line of work," Jake shot back. "Security requires complete honesty and trust between partners." That was the moment Sid's careful control finally snapped. "You hypocritical piece of what exactly is going on here?" All three of them turned to see Mr. Henderson standing in the doorway, his expression grim. The older man's gray hair was slightly disheveled, and his usually kind eyes were hard as steel. Behind him stood Maria from accounting and two other employees who had been participating in the drill. The room fell completely silent. Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment as she realized how many people had now witnessed her humiliation. Jake straightened up, clearly trying to regain his composure and control of the situation. "Mr. Henderson," Jake began, his voice taking on a respectful tone. "We were just completing the scenario when Williams here interrupted and began making accusations. I saw what happened," Mr. Henderson interrupted, his voice cutting through Jake's explanation like a knife. "I've been observing the entire drill from the monitoring station." Jake's confident expression began to crumble. "Sir, I can explain. You grabbed Ms. Martinez's jacket in an aggressive manner," Mr. Henderson continued, his voice growing colder. "You exposed her personal information without her consent. You then proceeded to berate her and question her fitness for employment based on something completely irrelevant to her job performance. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and mortification. Relief that Mr. Henderson had witnessed the truth of what happened, but mortification that her private business was now being discussed in front of so many colleagues. Furthermore, Mr. Henderson continued, "Your handling of the scenario itself was completely inappropriate. You escalated a de-escalation situation, ignored proper protocol, and demonstrated exactly the kind of behavior we train our employees not to exhibit." Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The situation required firm control. Ms. Martinez demonstrated proper de-escalation techniques, Mr. Henderson said firmly. She followed protocol correctly, showed good judgment, and successfully resolved the scenario. You, on the other hand, showed poor judgment, aggressive behavior, and complete disrespect for your partner. Sid felt some of his anger beginning to subside, replaced by satisfaction that Jake was finally being held accountable for his behavior. But his main concern remained Sarah, who was standing with her arms wrapped around herself, clearly struggling with the attention and exposure. "Sarah," Mr. Henderson said, his voice becoming gentler, "are you all right? Do you need medical attention, or would you like to speak with someone privately?" Sarah straightened her shoulders, drawing on the inner strength that had carried her through years of feeling different and out of place. "I'm fine, Mr. Henderson. I just want to continue doing my job." Mr. Henderson nodded approvingly. "Your performance today has been exemplary, and I want you to know that. As for you, Morrison," Jake's face had gone from red to pale as he realized the serious trouble he was in. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Mr. Henderson replied firmly. "Your behavior today was unprofessional, inappropriate, and potentially illegal. Grabbing a colleague's clothing without consent could constitute assault. Creating a hostile work environment based on personal characteristics is discrimination. Either of these could result in immediate termination." The room was so quiet that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Jake looked around desperately, as if searching for someone who might support his version of events, but every face in the room reflected disapproval of his actions. "I want to see you in my office immediately, Mr. Henderson told Jake. "Ms. Martinez, please take the rest of the day off with full pay. When you return tomorrow, you'll be reassigned to work with Mr. Williams for the remainder of your training period." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. Working with Sid would be infinitely better than continuing to endure Jake's hostility and undermining behavior. "As for the rest of you," Mr. Henderson addressed the other employees, "what happened here today is a reminder that we all have a responsibility to maintain a respectful and professional workplace. Personal characteristics that don't affect job performance are irrelevant to our work here." He paused and looked directly at Sarah. "Ms. Martinez, I've been impressed with your work since day one. Your dedication, professionalism, and quick thinking are exactly what we look for in our employees. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Sarah felt tears threatening again, but this time they were tears of gratitude and relief rather than humiliation. "Thank you, sir." As the group began to disperse, Jake made one last attempt to salvage the situation. "Mr. Henderson, I really think if we could just discuss this privately. The time for discussion was before you decided to grab your colleague and humiliate her in front of others," Mr. Henderson replied coldly. "My office. Now." As Jake reluctantly followed Mr. Henderson out of the room, Sid moved to Sarah's side. "Are you really okay?" he asked quietly. Sarah nodded, though she was still processing everything that had happened. "I think so. I never wanted everyone to know about the birthmark." "There's nothing wrong with you, Sarah," Sid said firmly. "And anyone who thinks theirs has the problem, not you." Sarah managed a small smile. "Thank you for standing up for me. I know you could have gotten in trouble for interrupting the drill." Sid shrugged. "Some things are more important than following protocol. Besides, someone needed to tell Jake the truth about his behavior." As they gathered their equipment and prepared to leave the training area, Sarah felt a strange mixture of emotions. The humiliation of having her secret exposed still stung, but there was also a sense of liberation. For months, she had lived in fear of this exact moment, and now that it had happened, she realized the world hadn't ended. More importantly, she had learned who her real allies were. The drill had tested more than emergency response procedures. It had revealed character, loyalty, and the true meaning of partnership in their line of work. And while the day hadn't gone as anyone expected, Sarah was beginning to realize that sometimes the most important tests were the ones you never saw coming. The next morning, Sarah arrived at work with a mixture of anxiety and determination. She had spent the evening replaying the events of the drill, alternating between anger at Jake's behavior and worry about how her colleagues would treat her now that her birthmark was no longer a secret. She had chosen to wear a short-sleeved shirt for the first time since starting the job, deciding that hiding was no longer worth the emotional energy it required. Sid was waiting for her in the parking lot, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Thought you might need some extra caffeine today," he said with a gentle smile. "Thanks," Sarah replied, accepting the warm cup gratefully. "Any word on what happened with Jake yesterday?" Sid's expression grew more serious. "He's gone. Mr. Henderson terminated him effective immediately. Apparently, there were other complaints about his behavior that hadn't been reported through proper channels." Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions at this news. Relief was the strongest, but there was also a small amount of guilt. Despite Jake's terrible behavior, losing a job was serious, and she couldn't help but wonder if things might have been handled differently. "Don't," Sid said, reading her expression easily. "Don't blame yourself for his choices. He created this situation through his own actions." "I know," Sarah replied. "It's just this job means everything to me. I worked so hard to get here, and I don't want people thinking I can't handle the tough parts of the work." "Anyone who thinks that after seeing how you handled yesterday clearly wasn't paying attention," Sid assured her. "Come on, let's go face the day." As they walked toward the building, Sarah noticed that several of her colleagues were already arriving for the morning shift. Her stomach tightened with nervousness about their reactions, but she forced herself to walk with confidence. The first test came when they entered the break room. Maria from accounting was there, along with Tom from IT and 2 security officers from the evening shift who were finishing up their paperwork. The room went quiet for a moment when Sarah and Sid entered. "Sarah," Maria said warmly, breaking the silence, "I wanted to tell you how impressed I was with how you handled that situation yesterday. The way you calmed Tom down during the drill was textbook perfect." Tom nodded enthusiastically. "Seriously, you probably saved me from getting tackled by Jake. I was getting actually nervous with how aggressive he was being, even though I knew it was just a drill." "Thanks," Sarah replied, feeling some of her tension ease. "I was just doing what we learned in training." "Well, not everyone does what they learned in training when things get heated," one of the evening officers chimed in. "Takes real skill to stay calm under pressure like that." As the conversation continued, Sarah realized that her colleagues were focusing on her professional performance rather than her physical appearance. The birthmark that had seemed so significant to her was barely mentioned, and when it was only in the context of condemning Jake's inappropriate behavior. Mr. Henderson appeared in the break room doorway, looking more relaxed than he had the previous day. "Ms. Martinez, Mr. Williams, could I speak with you both for a moment?" They followed him to his office, where he gestured for them to sit in the comfortable chairs across from his desk. Sarah noticed that he had removed a framed photo of Jake with some of the other employees from his bookshelf. "First, I want to apologize," Mr. Henderson began. "I should have addressed Morrison's behavior issues much sooner. I received feedback from several employees about his attitude toward female colleagues, but I chose to handle it through informal coaching rather than formal disciplinary action. That was a mistake on my part." Sarah was surprised by his directness and accountability. "Mr. Henderson, you couldn't have known he would do something like that." "Perhaps not specifically," he replied, "but creating an environment where someone feels comfortable behaving that way is a leadership failure. I want you to know that this company has zero tolerance for harassment, discrimination, or unprofessional conduct of any kind." He turned to Sid. "Your intervention yesterday was exactly what we want to see from our team members. Looking out for colleagues and refusing to tolerate inappropriate behavior is part of our core values." Sid shifted slightly in his chair. I probably should have followed proper channels rather than confronting him directly during the drill. Under normal circumstances, yes, Mr. Henderson agreed. But when someone's safety or dignity is being threatened, immediate action is sometimes necessary. You used good judgment. Turning back to Sarah, Mr. Henderson continued, I also want to discuss your performance yesterday. Your handling of the de-escalation scenario was exceptional. You've demonstrated exactly the kind of calm, professional, and effective approach we want our officers to use. Sarah felt a warm glow of pride at his words. Thank you, sir. I really love this work. It shows, he replied. Which brings me to my next point. I'm accelerating your training timeline. Instead of completing another month of supervised shifts, I'm recommending you for full certification. You'll take the final assessment next week, and assuming you pass, which I have no doubt you will, you'll be working independent shifts starting the following Monday. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise and delight. Really? That's incredible. Thank you so much. You've earned it, Mr. Henderson said firmly. Your dedication, skill, and professionalism speak for themselves. And Sarah, I hope yesterday hasn't discouraged you from continuing to be yourself. This company values diversity, and that includes all the different backgrounds and experiences our employees bring to the work. After leaving Mr. Henderson's office, Sarah and Sid began their first official training shift together. The difference in working environment was immediately apparent. Where Jake had been controlling and dismissive, Sid was collaborative and encouraging. He explained procedures clearly, asked for Sarah's input on decisions, and treated her as a genuine partner rather than a subordinate. They spent the morning at a local shopping center, conducting routine security checks and familiarizing Sarah with the specific protocols for that location. During their lunch break, they sat in the food court and watched the flow of customers and employees. Can I ask you something? Sid said after they had finished eating. Sure, Sarah replied. Yesterday, when Jake exposed your birthmark, I could see how much that upset you. But I don't understand why it's such a big deal to you. It's just a physical characteristic, like having brown eyes or being tall. Sarah was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. I know it probably seems silly to someone who's never dealt with something like this. But when you're different in a visible way, people make assumptions. They stare, they ask intrusive questions. They treat you like you're fragile or somehow broken. She paused, watching a mother push a stroller past their table. When I was younger, kids would ask if it was contagious, or if it hurt, or what was wrong with me. Adults would stare and then look away quickly when they realized I noticed. It made me feel like I was some kind of curiosity rather than just a regular person. Sid nodded thoughtfully. I never really thought about it from that perspective. I guess I always just saw it as part of who you are, like your sense of humor or your determination. That's because you're a good friend, Sarah replied with a smile. But not everyone sees it that way. In a job like this, where people need to trust you and respect your authority, I worried that being visibly different might undermine my credibility. And now, Sid asked. Sarah looked around the busy food court, observing the diverse mix of people going about their daily lives. Now I'm starting to think that hiding it was giving it more power over my life than it deserved. Jake used my own insecurity against me, and that's partly because I let the birthmark become this big secret that felt shameful. For what it's worth, Sid said, I think you're one of the strongest people I know. Birthmark or no birthmark, you're going to be an excellent security officer. That afternoon, they responded to their first real call together, a shoplifting incident at one of the department stores. Sarah felt a familiar surge of nervous energy as they approached the situation, but this time it was the good kind of nervousness that came with an interesting challenge. The store manager met them at the entrance and quickly explained the situation. A teenage girl had been observed concealing merchandise in her bag, but when confronted by store security, she had become upset and was now crying in the security office. Let me take the lead on this one, Sarah suggested as they walked toward the back of the store. Sid nodded. Sound good. I'll be right there if you need backup. When they reached the security office, Sarah could hear the sound of sobbing through the door. Inside, they found a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, sitting in a chair with her face buried in her hands. The stolen items, a few pieces of inexpensive jewelry, and some makeup were laid out on the desk. Sarah sat down across from the girl while Sid positioned himself near the door. "Hi there," Sarah said gently. "My name is Sarah, and I'm here to help figure out what happened today. Can you tell me your name?" The girl looked up through tears, and Sarah could see the fear and shame in her young eyes. "I'm Emma," she whispered. "Okay, Emma, I know this is scary, but I want you to know that we're going to work through this together. Can you tell me what happened today?" Over the next 20 minutes, Sarah carefully and patiently drew out Emma's story. The girl was from a family struggling financially, and she had been feeling pressure from friends who had nice things. She had convinced herself that taking a few small items wouldn't really hurt anyone, but the moment she was caught, she realized how wrong she had been. Sarah's approach was compassionate, but professional. She helped Emma understand the seriousness of what she had done, while also recognizing that this was likely a scared kid making a bad decision rather than a hardened criminal. Together, they worked out a resolution that involved returning the merchandise, a formal apology, and community service in lieu of criminal charges. As they left the store, Sid was quiet for several minutes before speaking. "That was really well done. You handled that perfectly." "Thanks," Sarah replied. "I kept thinking about what it feels like to be different, to feel like you don't belong. Sometimes people make bad choices because they're trying to fit in or because they feel desperate." "Jake would have called the police and had her arrested," Sid observed. "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "But I don't think that would have taught her anything except to fear authority figures. This way, she has a chance to make things right and learn from the experience." As their shift ended and they returned to the main office, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in just 2 days. The secret she had guarded so carefully was now out in the open, but instead of the disaster she had feared, it had led to getting rid of a toxic colleague, strengthening her friendship with Sid, and gaining the respect and support of her supervisor. More importantly, she was beginning to understand that her differences, including her birthmark, didn't make her weaker or less capable. If anything, her experience of feeling different had given her empathy and insight that made her better at her job. The test of who could protect her had revealed that the best protection came not from hiding who she was, but from being authentic and surrounding herself with people who valued her for exactly that authenticity. 3 months later, Sarah stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her crisp new uniform. The badge on her chest gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the words Senior Security Officer were clearly visible beneath her name. She had not only passed her certification exam with flying colors, but had quickly established herself as one of Henderson Security Solutions' most reliable and effective employees. The birthmark on her shoulder was clearly visible in her short-sleeved uniform shirt, and she no longer felt the familiar urge to cover it up. What had once been a source of shame and anxiety had become simply another part of who she was, no more significant than her brown hair or the small scar on her knee from a childhood bicycle accident. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Sid. "Ready for the big day? Coffee's on me before the ceremony." Today marked a special milestone for Henderson Security Solutions. Mr. Henderson was hosting an award ceremony to recognize outstanding employees, and Sarah had been selected to receive the company's Excellence in Service Award for her work over the past quarter. More meaningfully to her, she had been asked to speak at the ceremony about the importance of diversity and inclusion in security work. When Sarah arrived at the office, she found Sid waiting with 2 cups of her favorite coffee and a small wrap package. "What's this?" she asked, accepting the gift with surprise. "Just a little something to commemorate your first company award," Sid replied with a grin. "Open it." Inside the package was a beautiful silver pin shaped like a shield, with a small engraving that read "Strength through Authenticity." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she read the inscription. "Sid, this is beautiful. Thank you. I wanted you to have something to remind you that being yourself is your greatest strength," he said quietly, "especially on days when the world tries to convince you otherwise." They were interrupted by Mr. Henderson, who approached them with a warm smile and a manila folder in his hand. Sarah, perfect timing. I wanted to review your speech with you before the ceremony begins. Actually, Sarah replied, straightening her shoulders with confidence, I've decided to speak from the heart rather than use prepared remarks. Is that okay? Mr. Henderson's smile widened. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Some of the most powerful messages come from authentic personal experience. As other employees began arriving for the ceremony, Sarah was struck by how much the atmosphere at Henderson Security had changed since Jake's departure. There was a more collaborative energy, with people supporting each other rather than competing destructively. Several new hires had joined the team, including 2 other women who had specifically mentioned Sarah's example as part of their motivation to enter security work. Maria, from accounting, approached with a clipboard and a nervous expression. Sarah, there's something I want to tell you before the ceremony starts. After what happened with Jake, I realized I should have spoken up sooner about some comments he made to me and other female employees. I wanted to apologize for not being more supportive. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on Maria's arm. You don't need to apologize. Speaking up about harassment can be really difficult, especially when you're worried about job security or being believed. What matters is that we all learn something about the importance of supporting each other. Still, Maria continued, seeing how you handled everything, including the way you didn't let his behavior change who you are, it inspired me to be braver about addressing problems when I see them. As the ceremony began, Sarah looked around the room at her colleagues and felt a deep sense of belonging that had been missing during her first months on the job. The audience included not only Henderson Security employees, but also clients and community partners who work with the company regularly. Mr. Henderson took the podium to begin the presentation of awards. He spoke about the company's growth over the past year and the importance of maintaining their reputation for professionalism and excellence. When he reached Sarah's award, his introduction was both professional and personal. Our next recipient has demonstrated exceptional skill in conflict resolution, outstanding customer service, and a commitment to our company values that goes beyond what we could have hoped for in any employee, he began. But more than that, she has helped us understand the true meaning of strength and professionalism in our industry. As Sarah walked to the front of the room to accept her award, she caught sight of an unexpected face in the audience. Her mother had driven 3 hours to attend the ceremony, beaming with pride from the third row. Sarah felt a surge of emotion, remembering all the times her mother had told her that her birthmark made her special, and realizing that her mother had been right all along, just not in the way either of them had expected. When I started working at Henderson Security 6 months ago, Sarah began, her voice clear and confident, I thought my job was to blend in, follow the rules, and prove that I deserved to be here. I spent so much energy trying to hide the things that made me different, convinced that being noticed for anything other than perfect performance would be the end of my career. She paused, looking out at the attentive faces in the audience. What I learned, sometimes the hard way, is that our differences aren't weaknesses to be hidden, they're strengths to be celebrated. My experience of feeling different taught me empathy. It taught me to listen carefully to people who are struggling. It taught me that sometimes the most important part of security work isn't physical strength or intimidation. It's the ability to connect with people and help them feel safe. Sarah's eyes found Sid in the audience, and she smiled before continuing. I also learned the importance of having colleagues who support you for who you really are. Security work is about partnership and trust, and you can't build those things on a foundation of pretending to be someone you're not. She held up the award she had just received. This recognition belongs not just to me, but to everyone who creates an environment where people can do their best work by being their authentic selves. It belongs to supervisors who care more about character than conformity, to colleagues who speak up when they see injustice, and to organizations that understand that diversity isn't just a nice idea. It's essential for serving our diverse communities effectively. As Sarah concluded her speech, the applause was enthusiastic and sustained. But more meaningful to her than the recognition was the sense of peace she felt. The journey from hiding her birthmark in shame to speaking publicly about the value of embracing differences had been challenging, but It had led her to a place of genuine strength and self-acceptance. After the ceremony, as colleagues and clients approached to congratulate her, Sarah was approached by a young woman she didn't recognize. "Excuse me, Ms. Martinez. My name is Rachel, and I'm starting the training program next week. I wanted to thank you for your speech today." "Thank you for being here, Rachel. What made you decide to go into security work?" Rachel smiled somewhat shyly. "Actually, I heard about you from my cousin who works at the shopping center where you sometimes patrol. She told me about how you helped a teenager who got caught shoplifting and how you treat everyone with respect regardless of their situation. I have a visible disability. I use a hearing aid, and I've always worried about whether I could succeed in this kind of work." Sarah felt a familiar warmth in her chest. "You absolutely can succeed. And your hearing aid? That's just part of your toolkit, like my birthmark is part of mine. It might give you different perspectives that make you better at the job, not worse." "That's exactly what I needed to hear," Rachel replied with growing confidence. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Sid approached Sarah with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "when we were kids and you used to worry about being different, I never would have guessed that your differences would end up being such an asset in your career." Sarah laughed softly. "I couldn't have guessed it either. I spent so many years thinking I needed to overcome who I was instead of embracing it. And now?" Sarah looked around the room at her colleagues, her supervisor, and her mother, who was chatting animatedly with Mr. Henderson about how proud she was of her daughter. She thought about Rachel and the other new employees who would benefit from a more inclusive workplace culture. She considered all the people she had been able to help in her work, partly because her own experience of feeling different had taught her compassion and understanding. "Now I understand that the question was never who could protect me," Sarah replied. "The real question was whether I would learn to protect and value myself enough to let other people do the same. Jake tried to use my insecurities against me, but in the end, his behavior revealed more about his character than mine." Sid nodded thoughtfully. "And the drill that started all this?" Sarah smiled, touching the silver pin Sid had given her that morning. "The drill taught me that the most important emergency response skill isn't knowing how to handle external threats. It's knowing how to respond when someone tries to make you believe that who you are isn't good enough." As they walked out of the building together, Sarah reflected on the strange twists life could take. What had begun as her worst fear, having her carefully guarded secret exposed in front of colleagues, had transformed into an opportunity for growth, authentic relationships, and meaningful work.